What's up, everybody? Welcome back in to another episode of the Lawyer You Know podcast. And we have a kind of part two here on the Menendez brothers. I'm bringing John Nizer back in, who is the producer, manager, man behind the scenes here for the Lawyer You Know channel and podcast to discuss the newest and most recent press conference from a new district attorney who has a very different vibe and feel about whether or not these brothers should be released. We're going to watch part of that press conference. We're going to discuss Mark Geragos, who is the lawyer for the brothers, how his response is to what he calls grandstanding, showboating, and a dog and pony show done by the new DA. So let's get into it, John. Welcome back for more Menendez talk. What was your initial feeling and vibe when you watched the press conference of the new DA as someone who basically thought, okay, I think the Menendez brothers are going to get out? That was kind of the vibe and the feeling everyone had. What was your first reaction once you listened to this?
They have an uphill battle. It's uphill for sure with this guy. There is not much room. I guess from what it sounds like, the door is not shut all the way, but it's going to be uphill for sure. It's
Yeah,
not. It's not a quick open and close thing.
it's not as easy as it was before, that's for sure, because having the DI on your side is such a big deal. We talked about how unusual that is, what was just different about this case, and how everything was pointing to them getting out. Now they have their first, or I should say, most recent and newest roadblock, which is this DA. If you listen to Geragos, regardless of what the DA wants, there's still opportunities for them to get out, and we'll respond to those as we hear what the DA says. But let's go ahead and pull up here the new district attorney, which we've already heard from. And he said, I'm going to do what lawyers do, go back and look at everything, research everything, look at the prior trial, read all the transcripts, look at all the evidence, look at all the victim impact statements. And then our office is going to make the recommendation, which may be the same and it may be different. And we kind of got the vibe that he had a very different platform than the prior DA. And let's take a listen now to how he explains the process and what he expects his office to do.
Parallel tracks. The first track was the habeas track. That was a track.
So I should introduce, he's explaining the different ways that they could potentially get out or resentenced.
It started with a motion filed in May of 2023, where the Menendez brothers are asking for a new trial based on new evidence. About several weeks ago, we filed our informal response dealing with that habeas petition, opposing the habeas petition and saying that the justification for the new trial based on two additional pieces of evidence did not meet the legal standard to warrant a new trial. The second track of the Menendez case is on.
Pause real quick there. So he kind of moves quickly past this first route. Do you know anything about the status of where that's at, or what kind of the potential is there? Because
which one?
The habeas, the new evidence, the fact that they were potentially that this is a new evidence that has come forward, and so this should be a route to them getting released, essentially.
Yeah, and Geragos says that's still an opportunity and that could still happen for them. I think that's the toughest way. My opinion is that's the toughest way. Later on in this press conference, he's going to discuss how they've appealed. They've used every aspect that the law allows, and they've lost over and over and over again. They just continue to lose because they're guilty of this horrible crime. And I tend to think that the habeas would be similar to what a lot of the other legal routes were. To me, the other two routes are their best chance, and it seemingly was their best chance, at least with the last DA. And I still seem to think that those are the best chance they get out at resentencing, or the governor, Gavin Newsome, bouncing them out of prison.
Interesting.
Is the clemency track. This is a petition that the Menendez brothers filed directly with Governor Gavin Newsome. He could have acted on this petition either now, he could have acted on any moment since he has been in power since 2019. He can act on it today if he so chooses.
So he's saying this in a way, the DA is saying this in a way that even Gavin Newsome is not with him. He could have let him out a long time ago, and he hasn't either. So I'm not the only one sitting up here with a problem. However, Gavin Newsome has said he's kind of waiting for all of this to play out, waiting for all of the legal things to happen that need to happen. And the final hearing is on June 13th, I think, something like that, Gavin Newsome said, and he is waiting for a report, and he may make a decision at that point. So Gavin Newsome has very much left the door open. The door is not closed just because he hasn't made this decision yet.
Question real quick. So do you think, I'm just curious, not, coming into this from where we're at, is what the DA is doing right now, is this standard practice in terms of giving this kind of background and this kind of build up going into a hearing?
So this is totally unusual. Like this as a whole is completely unusual what's happening with the Menendez brothers. Not unheard of and not like it's never happened before, but the high profile nature of this is, I think, adding to why the DA is doing this. Number one, I think there's a bunch of reasons he's doing it. The high profile nature of the case, the fact that the prior DA did it, huge press conference, and was trying to use it, at least in his estimation, to get votes and to garner favor with the public. So he feels like he has to respond publicly, and that though he has issues with all of that. And I think he feels like if he's going to make this decision, if he's going to file this opposition, knowing how the public feels about the Menendez brothers and knowing the public push behind their release, he has got to give the reasons why he's not going to do it. And he's very matter of fact about it and very over the top about it throughout this entire press conference. And that's why I think he's doing it.
Yeah, because Geragos seemed very vocal about why he thought he was doing it. And so just curious if there's any merit to that or.
Yeah, Geragos was angry in his interview, and you sent me that interview because you watched it first. He was angry. He was cutting off the interviewer. He was saying, that's not right. He's either confused. Geragos thinks the DA is either confused. None of this matters that he's doing. It's total grandstanding. It's totally worthless. He's just over there, trying to pound his chest.
That's what he said, yeah.
He has unilateral constitutional power to commute the Menendez's sentences if he chooses and release them today. There is no hearing he needs to have. There is no deadline, and he can also do nothing. The third track is resentencing, and we are here today to discuss that third track. The resentencing is a law that was passed by the state legislature in California, somewhat unique law to California, that basically gives the judge, under certain circumstances, the power to resentence someone who has been previously sentenced. In this example, potentially, the judge could resentence the Menendez brothers from life without the possibility of parole to life with the possibility of parole. Now, resentencing hearings get started in two different ways in this case. One of the ways is that the court has initiated these proceedings itself under Penal Code Section 1172.1A1. The second way it also got started is when the prior district attorney filed a motion under this code section to begin the resentencing proceedings. What the position we are taking today is that we will go forward. We are prepared to go forward with the court's initiated resentencing proceedings and look forward to a resentencing hearing on that motion. However, we are asking the court to withdraw the previous district attorney's motion for resentencing because we believe there are legitimate reasons and the interest of justice justifies that withdrawal.
So they want to withdraw what the prior DA did. Geragos said that this is basically wrong anyways, and it doesn't matter. And in order for him to withdraw, you have to hit certain factors, and this DA didn't even touch on the factors. And all of those things are important, and he just didn't do them, which is why this is showboating.
Now, when one deals with resentencing, one of the key hallmarks of resentencing is, do the defendants pose an unreasonable risk of danger to the community? One way to decide if they pose that risk is to understand if they have been rehabilitated. And one way to understand if they've been rehabilitated is, have they accepted and exhibited full insight into the crimes that they have committed and accepted complete responsibility for their criminal actions.
Which, to a lot of people listening to this, might be, what is he talking about? Of course they have accepted responsibility. Of course they have admitted that they committed this crime. But what he means is, they've held on to the stories that make them look like victims. And that's really, I think, where he has his problem, is that they continue to try to publicly portray themselves as victims and as if this is something that happened to them as opposed to something they did.
Governor Newsome gave us a primer on how this actually works when he dealt with the Siran parole recommendation that had been made to him back in 2021. At that point, Siran, who was the assassin of Senator Robert F. Kennedy in the Ambassador Hotel.
So now he's going to give an example of a case that he finds to be similar to this, where he thinks it should follow the same track because he thinks it's a good comparison and illustration of what's happening with the Menendez brothers. Also a very famous case, obviously. Geragos says, completely different situation. That's parole. This is resentencing. The DA is wrong again. So Geragos has come out and just basically flat disagreed with almost everything this DA says.
Back in 1968, had been up for parole hearings 16 times. For the first 15 times, the parole board denied parole. But on this 16th time in 2021, the parole board recommended a grant of parole to Governor Newsome. So he looked at the case and he actually issued a written decision. And in that decision, he analyzed the factors that were both in favor of parole, and there's an analogy to resentencing, and the ones that weren't. The ones that were in favor for parole was that at the time of that parole hearing recommendation, Sirhan was 77 years old. He had been in prison for 54 years. He was suffering from a diminished physical capacity. In his childhood background, he had lived through a war-torn area. He was 24 at the time that he committed those crimes. And while in prison for those 54 years, he had engaged in comprehensive involvement in rehabilitative and self-improvement programs. He earned his Associate of Arts degrees and other certificates. He engaged his classification score, which is an analysis by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation as to what type of risk level you're at, was at the lowest. It was a 19. In fact, the California Static Risk Assessment said it was that lowest level. His rule violation reports, that's the number of reports that he had experienced since he had been in prison since 1968, was 2. And the last one was in 1972. He had letters of support from prison officials, and he had letters of support from 3 of the 9 living Kennedy family members.
So as he's giving this comparison, right, and there are a lot of similarities, what are you thinking? Are you thinking, if you're somebody who's looking at these two situations, you say, yeah, they seem the same, or are you picking up on differences?
Initially, yeah. I'm definitely thinking, okay, that's comparable. I think when he talks about the, the rule breaks, I think is what they were kind of dissimilar there. And I was going to ask you, is that significant at all in terms of the differences? But I don't know how that usually is looked at in terms of how bad are rule breaks. Are they significant or minor?
You mean when they get in trouble in prison?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, depends on what they are. Obviously, if you commit another crime like shank somebody in prison, obviously that's a bigger deal than if you mouth off to a PO or to a somebody that's in the prison system, whether it's an officer in there or if you start a fight, or you get in a fight one time, or you steal some food, or you spend somebody else's commissary money, or use somebody else's number on the phone. There's obviously different things that you can do that some are more serious than others. But the fact that they're both long ago obviously makes them less of a big deal if we're talking about resentencing or parole. But Geragos makes a good point that parole and resentencing are different. The avenues are different. But I also think like some of the Siran information, like he's 77 years old, probably not physically able to commit violent crimes anymore. The Menendez brothers are younger than that and are more physically fit than your average 77-year-old. So there are some differences that way as well. I think it's smart, right? I think he's a smart lawyer, obviously. I think it's a smart and a very good comparison to make. And I think there are going to be people that listen to it that think, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
P.S. I noticed your AG1. That's a good sponsor of the channel.
Not sponsored.
Yet the governor looked at all those positive factors, recommending parole for Sirhan. Now it's in 2021, 2022. But he said that one factor overcame all those other factors. And that one factor is that Sirhan had not demonstrated full insight into his crimes. He had not completely accepted responsibility for his actions based on his multiple stories of what occurred that night in 1968. So notwithstanding the fact that he did not, he had all these positive aspects, and he had the parole board recommending a grant of parole, in January 12th, 2022, the governor wrote that Sirhan poses an unreasonable risk of danger to the community and denied that parole. The reason this can be an instructive case is that there are almost no cases right now on Penal Code Section 1172.1, the resentencing statute. But the focus of it is the same focus as we have in the parole context. Is there an unreasonable risk of danger to the community by these particular people? In Sirhan, he was a of Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and he shot 5 additional people that night. And here we have the Menendez brothers, who are of their parents the night of August 20th, 1989. While Sirhan is 77 at the time that Governor Newsome made his decision, right now the Menendezes are either 57-year-old for Lyle Menendez or 54-year-old for Eric Menendez. They've served 35 years in prison. Sirhan served 54 years. They don't suffer from the diminished physical capacity that Sirhan does. They had also childhood allegations of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse in their childhood, while Sirhan had never been arrested or charged or convicted of any crimes before his offense. Eric Menendez had been arrested for multiple residential burglaries and received diversion. And Lyle Menendez had also been arrested for multiple residential burglaries.
I don't know why, but this always feels like the busiest time of year, and it's always difficult to get a nice home cooked meal and takes so much time to plan it out, go shop for everything, bring it home, figure out how much of each ingredient you need, cut it all up, and cook it well. So this year, ditch the fads and create healthier eating habits that last with real, clean foods. Green Chef makes it easy with recipes curated for a variety of lifestyles and dietary needs. Pre-made sauces and pre-portioned ingredients, there's less prep and less mess, and more time to savor delicious restaurant-quality meals. So you want to create better eating habits that last, go with Green Chef, because they make it easy with dietitian-developed recipes, options featuring fresh, organic produce, and quality whole foods delivered to your door each week. So you can thrive all year with clean, easy meals from Green Chef. Go to greenchef.com/LYK free and use the code LYKFREE to get started with free salads for 2 months, plus 50% off your first box. That's greenfresh.com/LYK free for free salads for 2 months, plus 50% off your first box. So thank you to Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. So that to me was interesting, right? Like the stupid kid crimes from the Netflix documentary where, they stole this or did this, as stupid rich kids, basically. He's holding that as something serious against them. Like some people have had no criminal history and they have a criminal history. So he's definitely trying to build it up in a way where they haven't been in prison as long as Sirhan Sirhan. They're not as old as Sirhan Sirhan, and Gavin Newsome still said no. And this is coming on the heels of him saying Gavin Newsome could have let him out this entire time, and he hasn't. So that's how he's trying to build it up. But what I will say is Gavin Newsome is a public figure. He does podcasts, goes on podcasts. He's in front of people. He's trying to stay with the times. So I absolutely think the public perception and public view and publicity of this case is very different than Sirhan Sirhan. I think there's a lot more public support for releasing the Menendez brothers than Sirhan Sirhan. I'm not sure there's a lot of people that really care about whether or not Sirhan Sirhan is released. And I think there are a lot of people that care about whether or not the Menendez brothers are going to be released. And I think that comes right for the reason that this DA is frustrated, because they are basically painting themselves as somewhat of victims who didn't really have a chance because of what happened to them. And now more proof has come out about the truth of that, at least how the public views it. Is that kind of the feeling you're getting?
Oh yeah, totally. I think and just continuing to speak on the Sirhan Sirhan, he paints him out to be even less of a risk if you put this guy out in the world,
right?
And in just in terms of his ailing, his age, like you mentioned, and yeah, I mean, it definitely I don't know, it definitely made me believe that I don't know if I lost my train of thought, but
I mean, if it's up to this guy, if it's up to the DA,
yeah,
the answer is no. They're staying in prison. Like very clearly, if it was up to him, they'd be staying in prison. But that's not necessarily how the rules work at this point. We'll listen for more of that as we go. But just as far as a layperson, somebody listening to this, watching this, that has background on the Menendezes, that kind of felt like you could understand why they would be let out at this point and why that would be fair. Is he changing your mind at all?
No. I think, well, for a second, I will say for a second, maybe. But after I listened to the rebuttal and the Geragos, like just kind of how he reacted and responded to all of the points that the DA was making, I was back on the other side pretty easily.
Yeah.
And I think also, I mean, just even kind of having, like you said, studied it a little bit and learned about the context of what's come out even since then and all the information that we now have, definitely hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't been dissolved by this.
Yeah, I think he makes a real argument. Like, I think he makes a real argument. It's a good illustration. It's an argument more to a judge or to somebody trying to follow precedent. I don't think it's going to flip much of the public personally. I think he's going to get a negative reaction from the public. And I think Geragos coming out swinging so hard was the right move. And obviously, I think it kind of brought you back around as well. And I think it will for most of the public.
Yeah. Do you have any like thoughts as to why he would kind of pivot so hard?
I think a lot of it has to do with his. You want to say the district attorney is not a political position, but I think it is. I think it's like you don't want to follow the lead of the prior guy that you said was so bad and weak on crime and all this stuff. And you have the opportunity to be tough, and you have the opportunity to come in here and do this. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't have a good relationship with Geragos. Maybe I don't know what kind of circles this guy runs in, but my guess is a lot of it has to do with, politics. The politics of the position, I feel like, is what this has to do with more than anything else.
Yeah.
Actually, to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he truly believes they are still manipulative and conniving and dangerous, and he doesn't want them out in his state and his community. That's possible as well.
Yes, both Sirhan engaged over the 54 years in significant programs, as have the Menendezes. When it comes to education that they earned, Sirhan earned an Associate of Arts degree. Eric Menendez has earned multiple Associate of Art degrees and is currently enrolled in UC Irvine. And Lyle Menendez earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from UC Irvine. As far as classification scores, they're all at the same level, a 19, which is considered the lowest level you can be at in the prison system. With respect to that California static risk assessment, they're all at the lowest level. Rules violations, you had 2. For Siran, the last one in 1972. You have 9 for Eric Menendez, the last in 2021, and 8 for Lyle Menendez, the last in 2024. They each have letters of support.
I would also be willing to bet he did not read what they were, which makes me think they were not that severe or serious. That's my guess. If it was something horrible, if it was something dangerous, my guess is he would have read us more details about what those issues were.
From prison officials. And the Menendezes have multiple letters from all living victim family members, aside from one who recently passed.
Because if there was something serious there, that's easy. That's an easy no-go. No way. We're not letting you out into society if you're still violent.
Well, and he gives just enough because he said something, I can't remember if it was Eric or Lyle. His last one was in 2024, which feels like yesterday, obviously.
Exactly.
So he gives you just enough to think, wow, this guy's still, but it could have been, who knows what it was exactly.
Right. And those details are going to be important. And my guess is if a judge or Gavin Newsome is really considering this, they're going to get those details.
And they received those letters in support of their being released. With respect to them, the key issue of exhibiting insight, full insight into their crimes and completely accepting responsibility for their actions, this is where the Menendezes, like Siran, also fall short. As we lay out in our pleading, which is now 87 pages long, we go through a 60-page statement of facts, which is different, by the way, than the 3 pages that the prior motion had laid out as far as the crimes that are.
And this is the grandstanding a bit. It's like, we went through everything. We filed 60 pages. They only filed 3. So it's like, this is why our position is correct. This is why we're better. This is why we're digging into this better. And he very well may be right. Like I said, he seems like a very smart guy. He has a purpose for doing this, and they put a lot of time and energy into this, and he definitely wants to do better than he believes the prior DA did. But him spitting some of these facts is putting it out there publicly that he thinks we did it right, they didn't.
Involved. And as we show, the essence of the defense that the Menendezes have maintained from the first trial into the second trial to the present day is that they acted in self-defense. They had an actual fear of imminent harm, in essence, that their parents were going to kill them the night of August 20th, 1989. As we show extensively, and just to make this point, that this case is not, or their defense was not about, because I know that issue has come up many times, but about self-defense. I take you to both Eric, Lyle's, and their own attorneys' statements. At trial, Eric testified, and he was asked, did you...
So as we're going to get into, he's going to talk about these lies that they haven't admitted to and he wants them to admit to. He mentioned that Eric and Lyle made statements, but he also mentions his attorney, which is something I want to highlight when we go to, is there a simple fix for Eric and Lyle to do what this DA wants him to do? And he'll check the box for him as well. But just remember that he does mention their attorneys as well.
Kill your father because he sexually assaulted you? Answer, no. Did you kill your parents because you hated them? Certainly no, is the answer. Did you kill your parents because you wanted their money? Answer, no. Did you kill your parents as an act of mercy? Answer, no. Why, Mr. Menendez, did you kill your mother and your father? Because we were afraid. What is it you were afraid of? I was afraid of dying. Who were you afraid was going to kill you? My mom and my dad. Lyle Menendez similarly testified as well that it was a question on August 20th, 1980. Did you or your brother kill your mother and father? Yes. Did you kill them for money? No. Did you kill them because you wanted to pay them back for the way they had treated you? No. Why did you kill your parents? Because we were afraid. That is the essence of their defense at trial. It was not. The jury was never asked to render a verdict on. It was all about self-defense. In fact, Eric Menendez's attorney, Leslie Abramson, said, "We have never said that because you're abused, you're justified in killing your abuser. We didn't argue that and never will." So the question then is, have the Menendezes exhibited insight into the fact that their self-defense defense was fabricated? And as we go through the iterations of their defense that they issued from the time that they were arrested until the time that they went to trial.
So he wants them to admit the self-defense defense was BS. It was a lie. And to do that, he's going to talk about suborning perjury. Do you start to get the lawyers involved? Do you start to have them admit to wrongdoing with conversations with the lawyers? Like, we got together and we said we were going to lie, or we told the witness to say X, Y, and Z. He mentioned some of that, but that's the dangerous waters we could be getting into.
So Geragos obviously expressed a lot of frustration with him continuing to refer to it as a self-defense defense when it was actually an imperfect self-defense.
Right.
And then even in the second trial, it was even different. Do you think that that's significant at all in the way that the DA here is presenting?
See, here's the problem. The DA is not presenting at trial. There's no judge saying what's inadmissible or not, what is true and what is false. He is basically throwing out there how he views it. And if you want me to check a box, here's what you have to do because here's how I see the evidence, which is a dangerous place to be for the Menendez brothers, and a place Mark Geragos definitely doesn't want to be. And if he doesn't have to be there, he's not going to play ball in that court. But that's what this DA is saying. This is how I see it. This is what needs to be done. We're withdrawing our motion that was going to support this at all because of these factors. And he gets questioned about, well, is all they have to do is admit to these lies that you want them to admit to, and we'll get to that when it comes.
Trial until the present day. What you will see is that the self-defense was the last iteration and version of their defenses. Because remember, the first defense that they came out with was, we didn't do it. That's not us. If you remember the 911 call, if you remember Eric Menendez screaming and crying when the police came out that night, he says to the police, "We're going to kill them," referring to the people who had just murdered his parents. "We're going to kill them. We're going to torture them." Who would have done this thing?
So he goes into now, we're not going to listen to his entire recitation of the facts, but he goes through all of the facts at this point. He talks about how they made it look like a mob hit, how they go through all the lies and all the things that began to unravel, and eventually how they go to Oziel and they admit to doing this, but they never say that they were in fear. And he goes through all these facts to try and prove that their defense was all BS, was all fabricated, and they need to admit to all these lies. We're going to get to kind of the 20 lies that he said they told and which ones they've admitted to and which ones they have not. But as you're listening to this, and as a lay person, let's say you're in Eric and Lyle's position, and you hear the DA say, you have told these 20 lies, you've admitted that, 4 of them were lies. I want you to admit these next 16 are lies. Regardless of what he says you need to admit, are you willing to just admit it to get out of prison?
So my thought process, first of all, I would ask my lawyer. I would ask whoever my lawyer is, and whatever they would refer to, I most likely do that. But if I'm Menendez and if my lawyer is Geragos, obviously, it feels like there's no trust to the DA. And so even if I admit these things, he hasn't said like, oh yeah, it's, I'll sign the paper right now if you say these things are true. I don't trust them. I don't trust it personally.
I think that's the perfect way to look at it, because when things like this happen, where there's no rules, there's no contract, you're not actually in court, there's nothing in black and white, and somebody says, do this, and then you do it, then they can ask for more. Then they can ask for more. Then they can still change their mind. There's nothing holding them to their end of the bargain. So I think that is the right way to look at it. But I think for the DA, it looks like he is giving them a chance, right? Publicly, he's saying, you guys come out and admit to this stuff, and then you can go on your merry way and we'll let you out. Or is he going to say, see, they're still lying. It's 2025 and they're still lying. And what else do we not know that they're lying about? I can't possibly let them out when they're still admitting that they're manipulating and lying all the way up through this process to get what they want. So that's the danger of coming out and doing what he's asking you to do. And additionally, If you say, yeah, I suborned perjury. Yeah, this was a lie. Yeah, we put witnesses on the stand. We knew we were going to lie. Yeah, we told them to lie. Does it start to implicate your lawyers at the trial level? That's a danger as well. And then are they going to come out against you? And he also talks about they had no problem lying to the family back then. They lied to all the victims that are all on their side then because they were all on their side back then. And they're on their side again now. Who's to say they're still not lying?
Yeah,
so there are real issues he brings up.
It almost feels like you're putting the ammo in the DA's gun, essentially. Like you're firing him up to go off into his next kind of game plan.
Because they've really, a lot of the lies that he says they told, they admit to almost all of them. You know, almost all of them unraveled. I guess the one that is hard is subjectively, do they still think that they were in fear? And for them to say that that was a lie is to go back in time and say, okay, actually, I wasn't in fear. How do you define that? I was living in fear because of the abuse, that if I was ever going to buck the system or tell on my dad or, you know, seek help, that he would respond by hurting me. Now, is that a legitimate fear? Is that a reasonable fear? They've admitted that they had an unreasonable fear, I believe. And that's part of the imperfect self-defense. And so it's like, what is really he going after here? That's part of the problem I have is he seems to be making these amorphous allegations of they're still lying to us. But how does that change all of the new information we have where everybody in the prison system, all the people they've helped, all the victims being on their side, that doesn't outweigh the fact that they lied way back then to try to get off and get away with this crime that they've clearly turned around on, but they still remain saying that they were abused and that was the truth. He doesn't say that it wasn't the truth, but it seems like he doesn't even believe him about that. All right, we're going to jump ahead a little bit here to him talking about the lies.
One of the things that I was thinking even at this point, as you jump ahead, is also this is a 45-minute whatever. You just jumped from minute 17, I think, of his.
Like 15 to 25, I jumped, yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost a 45-minute hear or whatever this is, hearing or address. Like, it does feel like really, you know, a lot of information that, you know, he's giving all the background of everything. Like, I don't know, it just feels like a lot to do to just kind of express a position on where we're going into the resentencing. It's not even a resentencing or the hearing itself. It's just a status update.
Yeah, it's wild the amount of facts he went into. But I think what he's trying to say is I did all the research, I did all the work, I put it all together, I put 60 pages in, I'm going to talk to you for 45 minutes about it. And he's showing them how much he knows about it and how he views the case, which at this point matters, right? Because they're convicted. It's not like they're presumed innocent. It's not like, you know, this is a prosecutor doing something wrong, saying who he thinks is guilty or innocent. It's like a jury has spoken. It's clear as day. They've lost every chance they've had an appeal legally. So he's just stating the facts as he sees them, which is very important in this process, right? It became very important.
And Lyle Menendez each testify to this fake "mom's going to poison us" story. What we also find out is that Lyle enlists one of Eric's friends, a guy named Brian Eslamania, to go ahead and corroborate the self-defense story. How is he going to do it? Because the letter that Lyle writes to Brian Eslamania, which is actually found by the police, he has detailed instructions down to the actual word that Brian's supposed to say that the day before these killings, the Menendez brothers came to him to get his handgun in order to establish that they had this fear of their parent, even at 24 hours before, and tried to get a handgun. That is actually disproven. And when it's disproven, again, Brian Eslamania says, look, I didn't have that conversation with the Menendez brothers, and I didn't even have a handgun to give them, even if they said that I did. So you have these situations. The Brian Eslamania attempted suborning perjury. The Jamie Bizarczyk attempted suborning a perjury. And the Tracy Baker actual suborning a perjury that the Menendez brothers engaged in to establish the self-defense. But it failed. And the reason we know it failed is that a jury heard all this evidence. And the jury, the second jury, the first jury hung. But the second jury that heard all this evidence,
Geragos took exception with that the second jury did not hear all the evidence. And that's true because of a much pared down trial. And the DA just kind of glosses over that and acted like, yeah, everything was allowed to come out in the second trial, just like the first trial. They were basically the same trial. Very clearly weren't. And that's why it's such a big deal. It was a hung jury on the first trial, which we dug into ad nauseum in the first podcast that we did on the Menendez brothers. But you see how when he does stuff like that, which I disagree with, that's what frustrates me about now. I don't feel like I can hang on every word that you say. I feel like I've got to go back and check if what you're saying is actually how it all came out, because the two trials are very different.
Yeah.
Rejected the self-defense and found them guilty of first-degree for both parents with special circumstances. And what's also important to note is that this conviction has been run by 5 different courts over the last 30 years. It went to the California Court of Appeals. It went to the California Supreme Court twice. It then went to the U.S. District Court. It then went to the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Menendezes have brought up every single argument that they bring up now about the faulty jury instructions, the exclusion of certain evidence at the trial, about certain other court rulings, and it's been rejected and rejected and rejected.
And he's right about that. It's not to say that there was legal error, but to act like they were the same trial and all the same arguments were made, that's not correct. He is absolutely correct that they lose over and over and over again in the appellate courts, and that they say their rights weren't violated. And okay, that's the reality that we're left with. But that, again, is not what they're asking for here. They're not making an appellate legal argument, at least for the clemency or for the resentencing, right? The habeas might be a more similar track to that. But I think that's kind of separate from the two tracks that they have a better chance of getting out on.
Over and over and over again. So, in looking at then whether or not the Menendezes have exhibited the full insight and complete responsibility for their crimes, they have not. Because, and we outline this in 20 different lies that they have told, which is an attachment to our submission. They have told 20 different lies. They've actually admitted to 4 of them, but 16 lies remain unacknowledged. They persist in these lies to this very day. So like with Siran not being able to exhibit full insight into his actions, so too have the Menendez brothers failed to exhibit full insight into their actions. Let me give you 4 examples where they've actually admitted to the lie. Eric and Lyle lied on the 911 call about just discovering their parents' bodies. Again, when they were found out and the tapes came in, they admitted to that lie, and I mean the lie of the 911 call. The second lie that they've admitted to is that they lied to the police, family, and friends and the media about their involvement in the murders. Again, when their confession came out on tape, they had to admit to that in the first and the second trial. They admitted that they lied to the police, family, and friends, suggesting the mafia was involved in the murders. And Eric admitted that he lied when he told his expert psychiatrist, Dr. Vickery, that his parents would kill him because his father's homosexual lover warned him that he was in danger 2 days before the murders. This is something that Eric Menendez told Dr. Vickery, and then months and months later finally recanted and told Dr. Vickery that that was a lie. But there are 16 lies that remain to this day that have been affirmed as recently as last year, where they affirmed the self-defense and they've never admitted to the suborning of perjury of others or the attempted suborning of perjury. These lies include.
What do you make of his tactic here, giving them the credit for the 4 that they've already confessed to or admitted were lies?
I don't think he has a choice, but it was kind of weird. I don't know why he even said the 20 and the 4. I would have just gone with 16.
Well, that's what I was kind of just processing, even as we're listening to it again. Like it almost, in a sense, it almost does add to the magnitude of, well, they said this already. Why can't they just say it? They're clearly holding these back. They're clearly holding on to these lies and trying to maintain these lies. It almost magnifies it in some ways, I feel like, at least from my standpoint.
And I think they would admit to some of this stuff, like, right? I think they would admit, like, yeah, I wanted this person to say X, Y, or Z, even though it wasn't true or something. Like, I feel like they would, but then maybe he's going to try to get them on other crimes, right? Like maybe they would be admitting to suborning perjury or perjury themselves. And then is that going to create an issue that they have other crimes that they're admitting to that they were never convicted of? I mean, that just really muddies the water. And it does feel, like you said in the beginning, it almost feels like more of a setup, because they're definitely not going to trust this DA. And you can tell Geragos does not trust this DA. I wish I knew the relationship between Gavin Newsome and this DA. I don't know what it is, but I wish I did, because that might affect what I think the outcome of this is going to be.
When Eric and Lyle claimed that their parents were going to kill them, that they had to act in self-defense by them first. That the Brian S. Lamina letter that they basically tried to suborn perjury from Brian S. Lamina, telling him to testify that they borrowed one of his handguns the night before the. Another lie that they told to support their self-defense story is that on that Friday, when they go down to San Diego, they said they actually didn't start in San Diego. They said they started at the Big Five sporting goods store in Santa Monica to try and buy handguns. That unfortunately, there was a 14-day waiting period, they said, so they couldn't buy the handguns at that Big Five sporting goods store in Santa Monica. They both testified to this. Turns out, as the evidence came in at trial, the Big Five sporting goods store in Santa Monica hadn't sold handguns for 3 years at that point. So it was impossible for them to have actually gone and tried to purchase a handgun instead of a shotgun that particular.
And it's also like these details, right? Or, a criminal defendant lying in his trial to try to get off with a crime, and then, everything happening where they, turn their lives around in prison. It's like making these details more important than what they've done over the last 30 years seems like a choice, right? It's definitely a choice from this DA.
Day. They've never admitted that they provided that fake ID and fictitious address to buy those shotguns in San Diego in order to conceal their connections to the shotguns and the ammunition. They just said that they used a fake ID because they had driven all the way down to San Diego and forgot their California driver's licenses. They testified that the day before the murder.
Some of this stuff was like, yeah, obvious. I just,
all right.
Like they admitted to using the fake ID, but the reason why you disagree with it, now they have to admit that to you. Some of this stuff just feels like, I don't know. It just feels a little weird.
They had stayed away from the home all day that Saturday, even though a witness came forward, who was the pool repairman, who said they were playing tennis that day at the house and disrespecting the parents who were in front of them. Again, another lie which they have never acknowledged. They lied when they said they didn't plan that alibi before the murders. They lied when they said they did not ask Perry Berman to come back to their house in order to be a witness on the discovery of the mutilated bodies. They lied when they said that they did not stage the to look like a mafia gangland hit. They lied when Lyle said that he tried to suborn that perjury from Jamie Pisarcik about his father drugging and violently her. They've never admitted that they lied when they testified that their mother was so dangerous and unpredictable that she tried to poison the whole family. And they've never admitted the suborning of perjury from Tracy Baker when they actually got one of Lyle's girlfriends to testify to the fake mother's poisoning the family story at trial. They further lied when they testified that they thought their parents were going to kill them during their Saturday afternoon fishing trip. They lied when they testified that when they burst into the den with their shotguns, that it was too dark to see and their parents were standing up or moving towards them. Expert testimony showed that at all times, the parents were seated on the couch when they were shot, or mom was on the ground bleeding to death when Lyle came back and shot her in the face.
What
they lied when they said that
these are actual lies?
Well, they testified to this, or this was evidence they presented that I guess the jury rejected by convicting them. But jurors don't go fact by fact saying this is true, that's false. They just say, when weighing all the evidence, did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they're guilty or that they did this? So again, this is his version of the facts and how he views them and what he believes to be true and false, which is why it's kind of uncharted waters that it might be true, might not. And if you're trying to force somebody to say it's true, that's like when I could go to my son and say, if you tell me the sky is purple, I'll give you $5. And I'm like, okay, the sky's purple. It's like you can force people to say something if you have what they want and you have enough leverage, whether it's true or not, which can be dangerous. And why that's not really part of this process. Is not, okay, you have to admit that you were wrong, right? And you have to admit that what you did was wrong, and you have to rehabilitate from that, and you have to talk to the victims in the case, which they've done. You don't have to go back and say every little thing you ever lied about over the last 50 years in order to be part of this process. And that's kind of what he's asking about, which it's almost like, to me, obviously some of these things are lies. Obviously some of these things are not true. Maybe there are legal reasons. Maybe there are other reasons that they're not coming out and publicly saying that. I don't think that that's legally necessary. I could be wrong about that. But I don't know, and I'd have to look at the Siran case closer, because he does say that that's what happened in the Siran case, which is why he was not let out. I just don't know if it was to quite this minute detail.
Maybe this is what you're getting at, but so if the DA is saying admit to these things, admit these lies, and then that essentially is an indicator of your rehabilitative state. if that's, or is that the only way to that we can see that, or what in your opinion is a way to judge if a criminal is actually rehabilitated?
So here's the problem. And let's take the fake ID, for example. I tend to agree with the DA, but let's just say they were stupid and that's why they did it. And they really didn't have their California ID. And it happened to work out that it also maybe wouldn't connect them to that, but maybe they really didn't have their California ID. Should they still swear that they were lying, even though that's not true? That's the problem, is like some of these details could go either way, even if you would tend to agree with the DA with them. So what does that actually do? Number one, the only way I would consider something like this is if we got it in writing from maybe the DA, the judge, everybody put it together like some kind of settlement agreement. And they say, if you check all these boxes that say all these things were lies, we will say, okay, this is you fully rehabilitated and, we can get you out. Maybe you consider some way to get protection like that. The statute of limitations is probably gone in perjury. I don't know what it is now, what it was back then. But I mean, there are ways you can make it work. I just don't think that that's actually what this DA is trying to do. I don't think he is trying to get them a get out of jail free card. It wouldn't be free, but a get out of jail card by saying, if you admit to these, you can get out and we'll support you. I don't think that that's what he's doing. I think if it was what he was doing, the better way to handle it would be not a 45-minute press conference, but a call to Mark Geragos saying, hey, Mark, I see all the good that they did. I see how all the victims support them. And here are some issues I still have. Here are 16 things that I still just can't get over. Can you talk to your clients, get some answers to me, and then I'll make my recommendation as to whether or not I'm going to support it or not. And if I really think they're rehabilitated, Mark could go back to his clients, talk to them, come back, they could have a conversation. Maybe even the clients could talk to the DA. Okay, good, we checked these boxes, or we didn't. I still think you're lying. That's a problem for me. I don't think you're rehabilitated. That would have been the more appropriate and cordial way to get it done professionally, rather than, I think what the point of this was, is to publicly state his objection, publicly say he thinks these guys are still dangerous. He doesn't think they're rehabilitated. He still thinks they have problems. That's what I think the purpose of this was. He wanted to get his public reason out there why he was not going to support their resentencing.
That they testified that the reason they rushed in on their parents was because of self-defense, and they thought that their parents were going to shoot them first that evening. And they lied when they testified that Dr. Oziel blackmailed them into confessing on tape to their parents. We lay out this series of 16 of the 20 lies that they have never acknowledged, never showed insight into, never completely accepted responsibility for. By the way, what I just described to you was mentioned in a paragraph in the original motion that was filed by the district attorney's office. There was no discussion of exhibiting insight into one's actions or completely accepting responsibility for it in the original.
And you notice how he says completely accepting responsibility, because they have accepted responsibility. We've done a lot of criminal plea deals in our firm, and they accept responsibility. They accept the general recitation of the facts. They don't go through and admit to every lie they ever told to every cop or every text message or every person they ever spoke to in the case. That's just not how you accept responsibility generally in cases.
Motion. So we are basically, in some ways, offering a path to the Menendez brothers. And here's what the pathway looks like.
Here's what he says. Here's the path he is offering. And this comes down to, do you trust him? Would you do this? Sign the dotted line at the bottom, and we're all good to go. So here's the path that he says exists.
Looks like. If the Menendez brothers at some point, unequivocally, sincerely, and fully accept...
So let's just start with those qualifiers. I'm going to back it up so we can listen to him again, because this is the type of thing that would make me nervous.
Yeah.
To the Menendez brothers. And here's what the pathway looks like. If the Menendez brothers at some point, unequivocally, sincerely, and fully...
Unequivocally, sincerely, and fully. Who is going to define whether their admissions are unequivocal, sincere, and full? Right?
Mother Teresa. Yeah.
You got to agree with every single word this DA says, basically.
Accept complete responsibility for all their criminal actions. Acknowledge that the self-defense defense was phony, and their parents weren't going to kill them the night of August 20th when they them in cold blood. Acknowledge that they suborned or attempted to suborn perjury in all the various ways I have outlaid. If they go ahead and finally come clean with the court, with the public, with the DA's office, with their own family members, and acknowledge all these lies, and then can be said to have fully and completely accepted responsibility for their actions. In future, the court can weigh these new insights into making a determination as to whether they now qualify for rehabilitation.
If they eventually, if sometime in the future, if when that happens, then the court can consider. So it's not like he's saying it's a guarantee, number one, which he can't really guarantee it, but it's not like he's saying it's a guarantee, number one. He definitely doesn't mean right now. He means this is something in the future. And then the court considering it, like we talked about before, is the court going to consider, why did it take so long? You only admitted this because the DA forced you to? Are you really rehabilitated, or are you trying to manipulate the system? All those questions start to strike up if you follow what he wants them to do.
And resentencing. And the people will do the same. The district attorney's office, if it is presented with these new insights, unequivocal, sincere acknowledgments of all the lies they have told for the past over 30 years, we too, in the district attorney's office, will reconsider whether or not we would want to go forward with a resentencing motion.
So he's not, no guarantees. If he does all this, then they will reconsider. So they will think about it again. Like, do everything I say, and maybe then I'll give you what you want. Still no guarantees, which is why this is just something that I don't see happening the way that he's asking for it at this point. Maybe they'll try. They'll go through this process, and if they lose, then maybe if you're Geragos and the Menendez brothers, this is something you can have as a plan B and say, okay, brother, let's talk. Let's talk about these 16 lies. But at this point, I don't think it's happening.
It just feels like bait. It feels like he's trying to just gauge if they're going to take this bait and then what that leads to ultimately.
But for now, while the Menendez brothers persist in telling these lies for the last over 30 years about their self-defense defense, and persist in insisting that they did not suborn any perjury or attempt to suborn perjury, then they do not meet the standards for resentencing. They do not meet the standards for rehabilitation. They have not exhibited the
now he's using these words standards, like as if I'm not tracking on that from what he said before, which is like these loose kind of general terms. And now he's claiming that there are specific standards that have to be met. Are there actual standards?
So yeah, and that I think what he's trying to do is go back to the Siran saying how Governor Newsome looked at full and complete responsibility standards. Those standards have not been met because there are still these lies out there. I think that's what he means. It could mean the legal standards that we talked about in the last video. It could mean the factors that Geragos said he didn't talk about and he didn't touch on that he needed to if they were going to withdraw their support here. So I don't know exactly what standards because he's being a little vague, but I do agree that he's beefing up the legalese here at this point.
Standards for rehabilitation. They have not exhibited the full insights and accepted complete responsibility for their actions. And as a result, just like in the Siran case, they pose an unreasonable risk of danger to the community, and the resentencing should not, therefore, be granted. I'm going to stop.
All right. So that's the end of his comments that we're going to listen to. But Geragos responded loud and clear that he is not really surprised. Okay. And we talked about when I've done some breakdowns of other comments this DA has made when he first took office that this might be coming. Well, Geragos felt the same way. And he said he prepared the brothers so they knew that this issue was going to come up. And I mean, this was the comment that was just, this is a not a quote. What am I trying to think? This is just my summary of it. He said, this is a fallacy of this DA's office. They don't care about victims. They didn't even let the victims know. All the living victims disagree with this DA, and instead this DA decides to re-traumatize them with his lies. That's what Geragos had to say about this DA, this comment, and what he's doing with regards to the resentencing of the Menendez brothers. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are so many things that are just like amplifying the way that I feel, including, and I assume, I can only assume that because of the support that he has of the family, he is speaking truly in kind of the way that they have, you know, in terms of a feel of how they all feel. Because there was another interview actually that I didn't mention to you that two of the cousins that are family members go on News Nation and talk about, and they're basically saying similar things to what Geragos is saying about how this is affecting the way that they're feeling. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like it's definitely a swirling kind of tornado of just factors that are all kind of playing into this.
So let's say the multiple scenarios. Let's say first, either Newsome or the judge or one way or the other, they get resentenced and they get out of prison. As a layperson in the public, what does that make you think about this DA?
That he's not trustworthy, that he's a joke, or that he is taking the position that he's taking now. That I wouldn't trust him in the future. Obviously,
I would probably think there's some politics going on in the background. That's probably what I would think if that's what was to happen. And then if we flip the script and we say, now that he has withdrawn his support and they don't get resentenced and they stay in prison for life at this point, what would that make you think about this DA?
Yeah, it's kind of feeling like it's a lose-lose for him, honestly,
okay.
With the way that the it seems like the general population is for their release, even to the extent that the previous DA was kind of trending in that direction as well. For him to take this staunch kind of 180 almost does feel like it's almost a lose-lose for him in terms of it doesn't feel like he has much general consensus popular opinion with him, nor does he have will he be highly favored for keeping them in prison, I guess.
Yeah, and that'll be a thing like as far as the next votes come. Will they like his hard on crime stance, or will they say, you had an opportunity for justice here after these these guys have served the time that they should have for the crimes and they've been rehabilitated, and you had no mercy on them in the form of what this justice could have looked like? I don't know. I just think that this is a big public story, and this is something that a lot of people have a lot of feelings on. And I think regardless of which way it goes, it's going to affect the way the people in that community and the people around the country think about this DA. I think there will be some support. I think there will be some support for what he said. And then I think there will be a lot of pushback for what he said, just because of what the public sentiment feels like behind the Menendez brothers at this point, feeling like they've done their time, they're rehabilitated, and they deserve a second chance at life, basically, to get out at some point. But we will keep an eye on it, and we will continue to follow it whenever the hearings happen, whenever we get final decisions. We will have you back on, John, to talk about whatever the fallout is from that. So everybody let John know how excited they were to see him in the comments. Make sure you guys like this video if you're watching it on YouTube, and leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. But for this show, that's all we got. So until next time, we are out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Geragos, the Lawyer You Know.